Every year, thousands of people make the trek to the peak of Mount Ainslie. From tourists to locals, they look out across the city from the Marion Mahony Griffin lookout.
But who was Marion, and why is her name on the lookout? Well, in this episode of the Canberra series, we're going to look at the life and career of Marion Mahony Griffin. Marion Lucy Mahony was born in Chicago on the 14th of February 1871. Growing up in and around Chicago, Marion was surrounded by nature, democratic ideals, and incredible women.
She described her mother as the most democratic of human beings, as she was involved with many of the social reformers in Chicago. This earlier exposure to progressive ideals influenced Marion's art, architecture, and views for her entire life.
In 1894, Marion became the second woman to graduate with an architecture degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and will go on to become one of, if not the first, working female architects in the world. Her cousin Dwight Perkins was also an architect, and he was the one who encouraged Marion to take up architecture in the first place. After graduating, her first job was actually in Dwight's practice, where she met renowned architect Lloyd Wright, whom she would soon work for.
Under Wright, she designed windows, furniture, and buildings, including Wright's Studio Oak Park. As a keen drawer and influenced by Japanese silk art, Marion was responsible for many of the renderings of Wright's plans.
Wright regularly failed to credit Marion for her drawings, as he didn't like sharing the limelight, leaving Marion overlooked and ignored.
It was during this time that she met Walter Burley Griffin, a landscape architect she worked alongside who held similar progressive views around democracy and the environment. Marion worked in the Prairie School of Architecture, which is a uniquely American style that favors horizontal lines, natural materials, and open, light-filled spaces. The style grounded buildings in their surroundings, which was a novel concept at the time. To help sell these plans, it came down to Marion's skill as a delineator to bring them to life. Marion worked in Wright's studio for a few more years, completing projects he had abandoned after eloping with a client's wife to Europe.
But it was in 1911 that some of the biggest events in Marion's life would occur.
In April, the Australian federal government announced the Capital Design Competition. And on the 29th of June, Marion and Walter got married. Marion had actually proposed to Walter.
The design competition was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them to design a city to their own principles. But Walter struggled to get started, much to Marion's frustration.
For the love of Mike, when are you going to get started on those capital plans? How much time do you think there is left anyways? Do you realize it takes a solid month to get them over there after they've started on their way? That leaves exactly 9 weeks now to turn them out in. Perhaps you can design a city in 2 days, but the drawings take time, and that falls on me. 9 weeks. It isn't possible to do them in 9 weeks. I may be the swiftest draftsman in town, but I can't do the impossible. What's the use of thinking about a thing like this for 10 years if when the time comes, you don't get it done in time? Mark my words, and I'm not joking. Either you get busy on that this very day, this very minute, or I'll not touch a pencil to the darn things.
And with that, the game was on. For 9 weeks, they discussed, planned, drew, and measured the ideal city. A city like no other, an organic city.
Marion used her skills to draw 9 renderings of the capital, with an incredible amount of detail for someone who had never set foot in the region, let alone Australia.
They got it done just in time for the last train and the last boat to Australia. And as we all know, Marion and Walter won the design competition. But Marion's name was kept off the entry, as they worried that sexist attitudes at the time would devalue their work. And it's because of this, a lot of people don't know that Marion helped design the capital.
But Walter didn't deny it once he was in Australia. Speaking to the Western Australian, he called her the genius and himself the businessman.
Walter was invited out to Australia in 1914 to oversee construction of the capital. Marion stayed behind to wrap up their Chicago studio before joining him. While Walter was bashing his head against the wall known as the departmental board, Marion did a couple of design jobs around the country.
Her most notable job was Cafe Australia in Melbourne. Built in 1918, it reflected Marion's love of nature and keen eye for design. The most striking part was the skylight and mural painted on the back. Unfortunately, all that exists of it today are photos and a lone chair that now lives in the National Gallery of Australia collection. As time went on, her love for the Australian bush grew, so much so that she created a series of botanical catalogues of native and exotic plants suitable for Australia. Both Marion and Walter regularly went on bushwalking trips, with one notable trip to Tasmania inspiring some of her most iconic work.
By the 1920s, Walter was fed up with the federal government ignoring his designs, so he and Marion moved to Sydney, and in 1924 they set up the suburb of Castlecrag. This was their chance to build their vision, a suburb that embraced the natural landscape and connected community.
It was a blank slate, with years of mismanagement leaving the area barren. Marion and Walter loved it in Castlecrag. Their front door was always open with kids dropping in to pinch some fruit from the fruit bowl, and Marion directing plays with the residents at the Haven Amphitheatre.
The dream wasn't to last forever though. With the Great Depression, work dried up in Australia. So, to keep Castlecrag afloat, Walter found work in India, with his first job being the library of the University of Lucknow.
After he completed the library, he was offered to work on the United Provinces Industrial and Agricultural Exhibition.
By this point it was 1936 and Marion was already retired and living her best life in their leafy suburb. But Walter needed assistance. So she got out of retirement and made her way over to India to help run their studio. And this would be the last time that Marion and Walter would work together. On the 11th of April 1937, 5 days after gallbladder surgery, Walter died from peritonitis, the swelling of the inner lining of the abdomen. With Walter gone, Marion finished up their final project and went back to Castlecrag. After tying up Walter's affairs in Australia, Marion made a brief trip to Canberra. She felt construction was progressing well, but it needed the lake to tie it all together.
It would take another 25 years before Canberra would get its lake.
When Marion returned to Chicago in 1938, she noticed that no one was familiar with Walter's achievements, so she started her biggest and final project.
Titled The Magic of America, it was a colossal work of 1,500 pages with 650 illustrations. Each chapter was named after a battle.
The Canberra years were known as the Federal Battle, an apt name for what the Griffins had to deal with.
It was never published, but the National Library of Australia has archived their manuscript, and it can be seen online.
For the rest of her life, Marion would write essays, present lectures, and continue writing her autobiography. Because Walter died so young, Marion felt like his work was being overlooked, so she spent her final years celebrating his over her own. And this is why the world remembers Walter better than Marion. Fighting memory loss, Marion died in Chicago on the 10th of August 1961 at the age of 90.
Her remains were cremated and originally kept in an unmarked location at Graceland Cemetery. It wasn't until 2002 that a memorial service was held to reinterr her remains with a plaque.
Today, Marion's legacy is getting the recognition and celebration that she has long deserved.
A creative, nurturing and smart woman, she shaped the nation's capital, lived her ideals and embraced nature and community more than her contemporaries.
If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment and share. And if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button.